This podcast is made possible through donations from listeners like you and our partners at Tallman Equipment, where they pride themselves on equipping their customers with the tools they need to get the job done right. They are dedicated to set the standard for quality, convenience, and reliability. At Tallman, your opinion is important to them. Rate and review any product or tool you've used on their new website at tallmanequipment.com. Line 11 Clothing Company, making apparel for our first responders with a positive message to patriots that you can be proud of. A proceed of the cost goes to helping our foundation ignite the fire for father engagement. Give them a follow at Line 11 Clothing on Instagram. And last but not least, Monzingo Knives. Each knife is created with craftsmanship that only a tradesman could provide. Find them on Instagram at Monzingo Knives and get your American-made Monzingo knife today. Hello and welcome to the Show Up Dad. This is a podcast for hardworking fathers. And at the Show Up Dad, we have recognized that providing for our children is certainly important, but when men truly understand their unique role and gain the knowledge and skills to be fathers, they can transform and impact future generations. Our guest today is RJ Zimmerman. He is a lineman working for the utility in Wisconsin. RJ is a second generation lineman in this trade. Okay, his dad was also a lineman who retired last year after 35 years of service. RJ started this podcast on his own 2 years ago called The Untapped Keg about mental health and sobriety, which is pretty awesome. RJ's greatest job in the world, next to being a lineman, is being the father of two boys, ages 4 and 2. RJ has been married for 6 years to his beautiful wife. RJ, welcome to the Show Up, brother.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely, man. So the reason why I called you on here is because we've been dealing with a lot of mental health issues, sobriety, and stuff like that. As we all know, it's the elephant in the room when it comes down to our trade. It's affecting a lot of people, not just us in general as a trade, but a lot of men out there. Okay. So I want you to be able to open up about your story, about sobriety, about mental health, and I'll let you take it away, brother. Thank you.
I appreciate it. So first thing, my name's RJ Zimmerman. I'm an alcoholic. Been sober for 8 years. And 2 years ago, I started a podcast with my brother-in-law to talk about our sobriety. So he's also an alcoholic and he's been in recovery for about 6 years. And when I first started going sober, listening to podcasts, every once in a while there'd be a story brought up of somebody being sober, made me feel like I wasn't alone. So I wanted to provide that for other people out there. And we started a podcast just talking about how, everything in our life affects our sobriety, but our sobriety doesn't affect everything in our life. So what does that look like day to day? What are we doing? A part of that was going into mental health. And I could never have dreamed how much this podcast has opened me up to change, like really digging deep into me being very self-loathing. Like I hated myself. I had no self-esteem. And I was so deep into it, I didn't even realize it. And I met so many people hearing their stories. It makes you see things from a different perspective. And when we get different perspectives, we can look at our own lives and be like, how can I make things better? You don't know how you can make things better unless you hear a different way of doing it. And being a lineman, where I tried really hard not to follow into my dad's footsteps. Part of that was I was kind of pushed to 4-year school. I think we all were, my generation. I'm 35 years old. And they told us you have to go to 4-year school. You have to go to get your bachelor's degree. You got to do this if you want to make something of your life. But that was the biggest lie we were ever told. And so I went to 4-year school. The 2008 crash happened. 2012 still wasn't looking very good. And I looked at what I like to do. And I was an athlete going through high school. I worked for the utility that my dad just retired from in the summers as a summer helper, kind of a line inspector, but I'd go out and help the guys every once in a while when they needed help. And I realized like that was the most fun that I had. Mm-hmm. And so I was like, you know what? I could probably I could raise a family on a lineman wage like that my dad did, and we were pretty comfortable. We weren't ever, going from meal to meal. So maybe I'll look into doing that. So I went to line school, and kind of right before I got a lineman job was when I went sober. It was like right at the end of line school. So it was the best decision that I made in my life, was going to line school.
Yeah, definitely. It's a big eye opener when you step into that role as a father to provide for your family. You literally are putting yourself in a position to where you don't care what it takes. You just need to provide for your family, and that's what this trade is all about. This trade is about providing for our family. I like that you said that. You know what I mean? You wanted to raise your family like your father did, in a sense to where you weren't living paycheck to paycheck, and that's a blessing
Absolutely.
to be able to do that.
And it's pride in your job too. So people would ask me what I did before
Hmm.
I got into line work, and I'd be, I was a utility locator for a big utility locator in the United States. And I wouldn't tell people that I did that. Like, I was almost ashamed of it because it was so low level, even though there's no reason to be ashamed of that. I just felt like there was more for me. But as soon as I got, into an apprenticeship, I was like, oh, I'm a lineman. Like, I'm an apprentice, but I'm still a lineman. I help put people's lights back on. Like, there's a deep sense of pride that comes with that.
That's funny that you said that, because I can relate big time. I remember my neighbor, he was a narrow back, right? And we're eating, he was having a barbecue and stuff. He invited us over, and his brother-in-law was there. And he's like, "Oh, I see you have a line truck at your house," because they allowed me to bring a digger truck back. We had just came back from on storm. This is in like 05, 06. And I was like, "Yeah, I'm a lineman." He's like, "So you're a lineman?" I was like, "Well, I'm an apprentice." And he's like, "Oh, okay." Like, it didn't even matter. You know what I mean? I'm just an apprentice, and I kind
Yeah.
of felt that shame, you know what I mean? And hindsight's 2020. Looking back, it's like, dude, you couldn't even get in. You know what I mean? You couldn't even carry my tools back then. Whatever. But when he said that, it was like a shame, because yeah, they looked at you kind of like, if you didn't have that status, right, then you
Yeah.
were you were nothing. You know what I mean? And later on, I found out that the reason why he was acting that way was because uh his brother-in-law was a utility lineman, and who worked for the local utility. So that's why he was like, "Oh, are you a lineman? Oh, you're just an apprentice." You know what I mean? It's like, dude, you could even do what it took to even get him. They wouldn't even pick you. So what are you snickering at? You know what I mean? But I could relate, is what I'm trying to get at there, RJ.
Yeah, and I appreciate, that just reminded me of a story going through the apprenticeship and passing. So we had it was a 4-year apprenticeship that we did in 3.5 years. So, um, you got, from your steps were your years.
Mhm.
And when you're a first year, it's basically your probationary. You can't do anything energized. So second year, you can finally start to work secondary. So I was so excited. I was talking to a friend in my class, and I'm like, "Oh, have you worked anything hot yet?" And there was a younger guy who was a journeyman there. He started laughing. And I'm like, "What?" He's like, "That's not hot work. Hot work is only, primary. Secondary is, you're just doing secondary work." And I'm like, "Well, it's the only voltage I can touch right now. So to me, that's hot work. I don't care." And I started laughing. But like, he wanted to put me in my place, and it's like, why? I wasn't, puffing my chest out saying like I'm, God's gift to line work. I was just saying I'm excited to touch something energized, actually.
Dude, I remember all the apprentices would get these stickers, JL line, or not JL, but they would say lineman on them, right? And the guy
Yeah.
on the pole and stuff like that. And we had some hands from Arizona, because I worked with a lot of 769 hands. And dude, they came and they scraped off all the lineman stickers off of all the apprentices' trucks. Like, you will not put that stuff on your truck. You haven't earned that title yet. And I was like, "Oh, okay. I hope they didn't see mine." You know what I
Yeah.
mean? And I thought it's a level of pride, definitely. When you you go out there and, even now, people ask me, well, what do you do? I'm all covered with tattoos and stuff, and they're like, well, what do you do? And it's like, I'm a journeyman lineman. And then they're just like, oh, okay. Yeah, man. Oh, that's a dangerous job. You guys make a lot of money, huh? And it's a level of pride, you know what I mean? Because we've earned that ticket,
Oh yeah. Yeah. And honestly, at parties and gatherings, people just want to hear stories. And we all have them. Every single one of us has them. So, and they're fun. I'm not gonna lie. Like we've seen some crazy stuff in the world. So it is fun to reminisce a little bit.
No, for sure. Especially with those old guys. I bet your dad had some great stories,
Oh,
man.
yeah. I mean, when he was going through and he worked in the same, he didn't just work at the same utility for 35 years. He worked in the same district for 35 years. And one of the guys that he worked with, they worked together for 25 to 28 years together. So in the same district. So like it's, you know, that's a measure of pride on its own too. But the stories that he has, it wasn't as safe, even though we're going through a really, honestly, it's a lot of accidents, a lot of fatalities right now. It was still more unsafe back then in the 80s and the early 90s than what it is today. And so he has some stories that I've like raised my eyebrows at, like that is, you guys were nuts.
Kind of like that story I told you about throwing a logging chain over the primer and the neutral and make sure it's dead.
Yeah, exactly.
That's crazy, huh? Some of the stuff that is still going on is, I mean, it's ratty. I mean, out here in Cali, you get smoked for doing that. You know what I mean? So,
Yeah.
definitely newer and improved ways to do line work that are a lot safer and a lot better for you. I thought it was interesting that you said, RJ, how it was well, I don't like to use the word dangerous, hazardous. Okay. So it's more hazardous back then, right?
Yep.
But there was not as many accidents happening. Why do you think that is?
It's, you know, at that time, and this is what I feel the entire industry is going through. We all know the older generation has retired. It's not they are retiring, it's they have retired. So when they were going through the apprenticeship back then, they were being trained by people, 30, 40 years in the trade. And they saw going through, they were basically the pioneers of linemen. I mean, you're talking people who started in like the 40s when the electrification of the United States was still happening, or even like the 50s and 60s when it's still trying to get electricity to everybody. Like they learned from those people. Utilities, and not just utilities, contractors, everyone was not prepared for the turnover that we've gotten. So now you have people 10 years is a long time at a company right now, especially as a lineman. They're doing the training. They haven't seen what those older guys saw, that you do things a certain way because you saw one time the worst happened. And then you have that young hubris going through too. Oh, that happened to you. That's not going to happen to me. And so when you don't have like a group of people saying this is what happened, and you have somebody saying who's training like, oh, the guy who taught me told me that this happened to him one time, so that's the reason I do this. And then you have the young guys, oh, well, that never happened to you. That's definitely not going to happen to me. And you start taking, it's not just taking shortcuts. Like you start doing everything haphazardly, and it just leads to more accidents. And then utility companies got used to having that experience, and contractors and everybody else. So they think they can get by with fewer crews, but you have less experience. You need more crews to do the same amount of work. But they won't hire because they're used to making that profit. It's profits over people.
Wow. No, I agree with you 100%. To even add on to that, what I've seen too is, we have more gear, more gadgets, more everything, right?
Yeah.
And people are buying those things. And I want to quote a good friend of mine who works with me. His theory is, you have a tool list. When you're in the union, they have a tool list, right? What you're supposed to have, which is Kleins, which is your side cutting pliers, your channel locks, your wrenches, your hammer, and a knife, right? And a folding ruler. Pretty much around the country, that's what you're supposed to have according to your contract, right?
Yeah,
So with that being said, it never says Milwaukee hard money gun. It never says, all these different, a press, a candlestick press. It doesn't have any of these other tools that these people are buying, So now you're buying these things, which is making your life easier, but at the same token, it's speeding up production. So you went from 2 pulls a day to now 4 or 5 pulls a day. And guess what? Now that's expected of you every day and more. So you literally, when you're buying these tools to make life easier for yourself, you literally are breaking down conditions, if you think about it.
absolutely. Absolutely. And then when you take that, you have these new tools, and you had the old guard that was doing a certain amount every day. As a young journeyman, young foreman, you think you should be getting the same amount done as those old guys those new tools. So you're absolutely right. So we put this pressure on ourselves. Do we ever do enough? And for myself, like, I never felt like I did enough. So I always felt rushed. And I can guarantee that the younger kids would see what I'm doing. They could feel me feeling rushed. And they internalize that as well, that they had to rush.
Yes, we definitely set that atmosphere. I mean, we even do that at the home, if you really think about it. When you get home and you're still
Absolutely.
in lineman mode, right? Your family, if you haven't decompressed before you got there, your family starts feeling that anxiety that you built up, that rush, that need to get something accomplished. And then now they're rushed. And that creates all kinds of anxiety disorders in our kids, believe it or not.
Yeah. I mean, even between partners, right? Like, just thinking about doing things a certain way, like, as a lineman, fewest movements possible, right? You try to do things smooth, one motion, you finish things at a level, you move to your next level so you're not booming up and down. Well, when you're doing tasks at home, what do? Well, your brain is working that way. You're going to do things that way, so you're no wasted movements. Well, when you watch your partner or your wife do something and there's wasted movement, you start to get a little bit critical. Hey, what are you doing? I mean, and that's something that I know I did. I can remember, like, my dad doing that to me, and it's not his fault. Like, and it took a lot for me to see that I was bringing that home, and it was never pointed out to me that I brought it home. I just, honestly, it was through the podcast that I realized, like, I am bringing stuff home that should not be brought home, and that's one of them.
Yeah, you definitely start getting super critical about the way they work. I just started, I'll give them the task. I'll set the parameters. That's what's helped me. And then I let them do it. And then if they have questions, I allow them to ask me, and then I give my insight. Otherwise, you're going to be one-stepping them. And that is so detrimental, especially for my teenage daughter, dude, when I'm one-stepping her and telling her basically just one-stepping like you would do at work, telling her every move and everything like that, dude, it just breaks them down to where she actually told me, she's like, I am never going to be perfect enough for you. So it's so important to turn that off and just set the parameters, guys. I mean, if you got, the guys who are listening right now, set those parameters, let them know their boundaries, let them work in that confinement and that boundaries that you set for them, and then let them figure it out. I mean, one of the biggest complaints I'm having right now, RJ, is you cannot teach common sense, right? All these guys, they're super book smart that are coming out.
Yeah.
They can tell you about fair residence, everything. They could break it down, everything, right? But they're lacking the common sense to get out of the bite. They're walking under loads. And it's like, dude, what point of that don't you understand that if that thing breaks, it's going to kill you?
Mm-hmm.
It's just common sense. And then I started talking to all kinds of psychologists and stuff like that. And they're like, dude, well, common sense is basically you setting parameters for your kids and letting them figure it out, letting them get themselves out of a bind. And how many times, RJ, do we say it's not what makes it? What makes a good lineman is how they get out of a bind, because you're going to get in a bind, right? When you get in
Oh,
a high line bind and stuff like that, what makes a good lineman is how he's going to get himself out of that bind. That's when he starts having to think. And sometimes we got to let our kids, our spouse get in a bind without being critical, and then just offering, advice. Okay, well, maybe try this, or what if you do this, and then letting them figure it out, especially for our kids, and that's going to help them develop that common sense that is so lacking in the world today.
and one thing with my kids that I do, and I've done it since they were a baby, is I explain everything to them, right? I over explain. And
Mm-hmm.
it has helped my 4-year-old understand like the boundaries even better, because if I say no, I don't just say no because I said so. I say no because, and this is why. And if I can't, and I have done this multiple times where if I say no and I can't come up with a reason for it, it's probably because I don't want to deal with like what's going on. And that's a me problem. That's not a him problem. So when I say, no, daddy's wrong, go ahead, go do it. Like running, splashing in a puddle. It's a warm day. We're walking. They're not riding in the truck. Like, why can't he go splash in that puddle? There's no reason. Go splash in the puddle. Like I'm just, I don't want to clean you up when we get home is what it comes down to. Well, you're a kid. Go be a kid. Go have fun. And like, that's just a simple example, but there's been other times too where I've just said no because I didn't want to put the um, energy forth for something. And, that's the same if you take that with kids, it's the same way with apprentices. And that's something that we don't think about when we journey out. Now it's, oh, we get to have fun, we get to do it all. But like you said, the book smarts, they need help with their mechanical, how to do things from a mechanical perspective. I was one of them. My dad did pretty much everything because there was no reason, like he could do it 4 times faster and better than the way that I could. So when it came to doing certain stuff, like I didn't have a lot of hands-on. I knew how he did it, but not a lot of hands-on experience. So I had to learn with my hands on.
Mm-hmm.
That's the same way with a lot of people that go into line work. We need to remember that they need to put their hands on to learn for most of it.
Mm-hmm. And that goes, it coincides with what Dr. Stephen Gurian from the National Father Institute of Spokane, Washington always says men are very spatial. We need to see things. And that's why psychology is failing men this day. Okay. He says you can't take the same parameters and sit a man down for 45 minutes and have someone talk to him about their feelings. It just doesn't work because we're not wired that way. He's like, we need to start changing the way the game is, changing the atmosphere, start putting them in these positions to where they're actually working with their hands. One of the ways he does it is he throws a ball with them while he's in the office. He allows them to stand up and he plays catch with them in the office. And he's like, oh, I'm getting a better response talking to these guys because now they're playing catch, right, with me in the office. And now they're starting to talk because now their hands are moving. They're starting to use their hands, and that's super critical. That's why some of the best conversations you're going to have with your son is going to be while you're wrenching on the truck, or when you talk to a kid or another father and say, what is some of your fondest memories? They're going to say, oh, man, I remember my dad used to play catch with me. And it's because that's the way we're wired. We're never designed to just be sitting down, talking about our feelings. That's more for, that's more of a woman's perspective, right? Because men are very, very active in what we do. So I think that's interesting that you said that. I too, my father did the same exact thing. I didn't really learn. Like, I saw what hard work is. I had to do the grunt work, like chopping wood and and making kindling for my mom and all this other stuff, picking up bales and stuff and helping with the fences. But when it came down to doing the actual work, like using the tractor and stuff like that, I was never allowed to. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? That was my dad's job. You know, don't touch it. I can do it faster. I don't got time, like you said, you know. And so when I went to the military, I didn't I didn't get that training either. So I had to literally be I you know I'm big enough now and honest enough to say that I learned how to actually work like mechanical aptitude in line work. They showed me how to use a crescent wrench right. You know, you'll be surprised how many people don't know how to turn the jaws on a crescent wrench the right way. You know, and I was one of those guys, and you know, they had to show me that. You know, so you're absolutely right. When you don't allow your kids to do the stuff and teach them and then allow them to do it, it definitely hinders you.
And you know, part of the problem with how we're raised as men is there's shame in not knowing how to do something, right?
Yep.
It doesn't matter what it is. It doesn't matter if you've never been exposed to it. It doesn't matter any of it. All that matters is you don't know how to do something and it's just straight shame. It's not just guilt, it's shame. And we do it as linemen. Like, oh, you know, you don't know the difference between 120 and 240. You don't know A over C. How do you not know that? And it's like, you know, one of my favorite things that I used going through the apprenticeship or even as a young journeyman, my line school teacher told me is you're not born a journeyman, and they weren't either. They had to learn it too. Sometimes people need to be reminded that you weren't born a journeyman. And that goes to everything in life. You weren't born knowing something. So it's okay to have to learn. But sometimes we forget that that's a process.
Yes, it's definitely a process. And we got to just have that patience to be able to show this next generation, you know, whether it be in our own homes or the next generation in our trade, them coming up.
Absolutely.
You know what I mean? We have to show that patience. One of the things I wanted to talk to you about, RJ, is you keep on talking about your father, and I wanted to ask you, how is your relationship with your father being a lineman?
Um, it was honestly growing up. He was a great dad. I don't remember. I can count on one hand the amount of like sporting events or extracurricular activities that my dad was not at. So, but he worked a lot. I mean, that doesn't mean he didn't work a lot. He was working, you know, 1,000 to 1,200 hours of overtime a year when I was growing up, and I didn't know that. I knew he was out a lot. I remember him going to work storms, but every time he'd go on storm, he'd come home with football cards, and you know, it was. I had a very good relationship with my dad growing up, but he was hard on me, and I'm the oldest. I have a younger brother and a younger sister, and it was on me to do the chores and make sure they did the chores too. Um, and you know that taught me a lot about responsibility, and it helped instill in me a work ethic that got me noticed, you know, doing line work at the utility and honestly everywhere I worked. But it's not to say that it wasn't tough at times. Growing up with, you know, hard-headed, stubborn father who is, you know, he's a damn good lineman, and I would say a typical father, right? Where at that age, and it's different for everybody, but when we say that age as guys, you know, there's handshakes and a how you doing, and no more I love you and a hug.
Mm-hmm.
And that part was rough, like when I needed to be able to express my emotions,
Mm-hmm.
and being taught that the only emotion that is okay is anger, even more than joy, even more than anything else. Like anger can be expressed, and that's okay, but everything else needs to be muted. And you know, my senior year, baseball, their bases were loaded, 2 outs, down by one, and I grounded out to the second baseman to make the final out of my high school career, and that just devastated me because We should have won that game even before that.
Mhm.
And I was just, I was a mess after the game. I was bawling, I was crying, got a hug from my mom. And my dad standing there goes, "What are you crying about? This is nothing to cry about. Just, you need to stop." And it's like, I was so mad at that moment. And my dad is a good father and he's a good grandpa, but emotionally,
Mhm.
we have never connected. And I don't know if we ever will. Um, so that's kind of where our relationship is now, where um, I followed in his footsteps a lot, but that part is where I want to change it. And
Mhm.
my dad he's a great man, he's a great person, and he's a great father. But there's also places that we could, get better, change things, see different perspectives.
Yeah, for sure. And I think a lot of men can relate with what you just spoke on because I mean, I know I can. Um, a lot of times for lack of better words, we feel that we can't talk to our fathers about that. I don't know whether it be shame or whatever. I know I know I have a hard time bringing it up to my father the way he made me feel, and because you do as a little kid, you look up to your father. He is your
Yes.
world. I mean,
Yep.
I remember my dad's a little man. I mean, I'm short too. I'm real stocky. Anybody who knows me knows who I am and what I'm about. And my dad was the same way. And that man was the only man I've ever feared, like literally. And with that being said, I never questioned anything he said. If he said this is this, that was in stone. You know what I mean? And
Oh yeah.
his word meant everything, right? And I think it would have been a lot more productive if he would have just said, "Hey, man, I'm proud of you. Hey, you're doing an amazing job." And I think that's as men, we need to hear that. You know.
Yeah. Yeah. I found myself, and it took me a while to see this, but I found myself going through the apprenticeship,
Mhm.
trying to make the journeyman say that. Be proud of
Mhm.
me. I'm
Yep.
doing things. I'm working, going the extra mile. I want to make them proud of me. And then I realized, oh, that's me trying to make my dad proud. What do you
Mhm.
know? I have a little bit of dad issues and I didn't even realize it.
Mhm. And dude, I mean, spot on when you say that because some of the linemen that I looked up to, I was doing the same thing. And guess what? Men are going to fail you. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
1 minute they're the greatest thing since sliced bread. You can't do anything wrong. You're great. You're amazing. My gosh, all this stuff, and then all those out of boys that you get. All it takes is one oh shit, and now you're your bag. You know what I mean? And all this
Oh yeah.
stuff. And you know how that goes in the trade, and then you're devastated. You're like, what the hell, man? I just busted my ass to try to get you to it. Because what you're really saying is it's acceptance, bro. That's what
Yes.
it's the deeper issue is acceptance. You want to be accepted because for whatever reason we feel like we didn't get acceptance from our own father at the home. So you're forever trying to find that acceptance, you know?
Absolutely. And that's part of the reason that I drank the way that I drank. I didn't drink
Mhm.
all the time. Um, I'm the type of alcoholic that if I have one, it turns into 20, 30, 40 until I pass out.
Yep.
So I had to stop drinking because of that. And um, that's part of the reason is that when I would drink, like I would be the life of the party and I'd feel accepted.
Mhm.
So,
Or so
why
you
would I?
thought, right?
Right. So then why would I do that? Well, all of a sudden I started to realize that like the acceptance starts with myself.
Yep.
And I need to start accepting me as I am. And then all of a sudden the love for that my kids will feel they'll start getting the best RJ. And the best RJ is going to be a better partner, better husband, better father, better son, brother, better brother. Like everybody's going to get the best RJ, and that's going to help everybody. But where does it start? It starts with myself looking in the mirror and saying, you're not saying I love you or hey, you look pretty awesome. It's, you know what? You're okay. You're going to get through this, and starting there. And that's where I'm still at. I
Mm-hmm.
still wouldn't call myself a friend to myself, but I'm no longer looking in the mirror and calling myself a POS. I'm no longer doing things and being like, God, I screwed that up. I can't believe it's like that. It's like, no, everything's up there. It looks good. Guess what? The fuse is holding. Like, who cares if it took you 2 minutes longer than it did the last time you did it? Like, it's fine. And that's kind of what we have to get to is you are okay. Looking, I'm okay as a person. I can make people better around me. And that starts with just being okay with yourself.
Yes, I agree 100%, man. That self acceptance. One of the things I started implementing in my family is I started to not be so critical. Like, say, for instance, I've recognized that my wife likes to be on time to everything. So if she's late because I didn't help her get the kids or whatever, or she's running late, she starts kind of panicking. So then it's like, okay, how do I mitigate this? Instead of yelling at her or getting upset like I used to in the past, be like, well, it's your fault. You should have had the shit planned out. You know what I mean? How we can be critical
Yeah.
as linemen. It's like, okay, well, how can we mitigate this? Okay. So instead of complaining that you got to cook something for the potluck, let's just go pick something up. Simple. You know what I mean? Solve it,
Yeah.
keep it simple. It's something that I learned in the military. Keep it simple, stupid, don't freak out about the things that you cannot change. You know what I mean? Just adapt and overcome, implement that and make it simple. You know what I mean? People are not going to care if you showed up with, potato salad from the store, or you actually went through the process of making it yourself, boiling the potatoes, all this different stuff. You know what I mean? Just make it simple. Why life's already difficult and life is already complicated as much as possible. Why make it any more? You know what I mean? Try to keep everything as simple as possible, you know?
That is perfect, especially as linemen, even working day to day, but going home, like we tend to complicate a lot of things when really it's a couple different words will will suffice, right? So
Yep.
that's I really like that.
Mm-hmm. And what another one of the questions I want to ask you, RJ, real quick, because since we're talking about your father, you know, a lot of the things I want to address with these fathers that are on the road, right,
Yeah.
is how they make when they're on the road, how big of an influence that is on your child's life, and how did it make you feel? Like, did you, not knowing that your father was at work, did it make you feel lonely or abandoned when he was gone all the time?
For myself, no. Like
No.
I was a
Okay.
very active kid. I had a pretty big imagination too. So I would go outside and just honestly throw baseball against a brick wall and catch it coming back to me.
Mhm.
But part of the reason that I didn't feel that way is when my dad got home, his attention was me,
Good.
right? It was me, my brother, and my sister. Like that is that made me know that like even though he was gone and sure I missed him and he missed birthdays, but I don't remember those times because
Mhm.
they weren't as impactful on me as him being there. And that's I remember. So when people talk about me, like I tend to zone out and don't um I can't really register what's going on. I just don't get comfortable in that. So my dad gave a speech at my wedding and I just remember like the first like four sentences, but he talked about how he wasn't there for everything, and you could feel the guilt in his voice.
Mhm.
And I don't remember much of it afterwards, but I went up to him after and I'm like, Dad, you remember the times you weren't there? But I don't remember that. That's not how I remember my childhood. You were always there. And um, I think that that's what is important, is that if you're gone, when you get home, the attention is on your children. It's not just, it's not, we all have other things going on in our lives,
Mhm.
but you have to give them your intention and your attention, and they will remember that more than anything else.
Man, I love that you said that. Fathers, listen up. You just heard it right out of the man's mouth. RJ Zimmerman talking about being where your feet are, something that we always stress on this podcast. And that is one of the core values, RJ, of our foundation, is being intentional. And you just hit the nail right in the head. You remembered the intentional movement of your father, not the absence of him, right? But when
Yeah.
he got home, it was able to change the atmosphere and change the way you felt about him. You know what I mean? In that instance, and that's important. I think I super hope that the guys that are listening, they heard that, because that's a big deal. That's one of the things that a lot of fathers are always asking me. They're like, man, I work 24 and 8s, Dave, or whatever. You know what I mean? It's hard to be there. And it's like, look, dude, no one's telling you to quit your job. At the end of the day, you got a choice to make. You know what's right for your family. And when you do have off, make that time count, because that's something you don't get back. And it's going to be far more impactful than the time that you were gone, you know?
That is the truth.
Man, that's awesome, dude. I'm glad you said that. Now, you talked a little bit about your sobriety. Now, what are you doing as far as like mental health? Like, how do you, like, what's helping you with all that?
So I've been seeing a therapist for about two
Uh-huh.
years. I've gone to like four different ones because I didn't realize this until like listening to a few people. But like, not every therapist is going to be for every person. It's just like, coaches or
Yeah.
anything else. Like, it's okay to say this is not the relationship that I need from my therapist. Let's try a new one. Um, so that was a big thing, is like talking about what was going on in my life, trying to help find healthier coping strategies, right, for my stress. Because that, I went from alcohol to work to, um, you know, honestly, TV shows and movies. And I didn't really focus on myself trying to be the best me. But so therapy was a big one. And then like reading books and listening to people's stories, because you can take pieces from somebody's story, relate to it, and maybe you could take something that they did and put it into your own life. And you don't know if it'll work without trial and error. Kind of like I relate it to food a little bit.
Mhm.
If you're not willing to try a new food, you don't know if you've had your favorite food yet or not. Something out there might be your favorite food, but you're just too scared to try it.
Mhm.
So change is scary, right? Taking that
Mhm.
first bite of something that you're not sure how it's going to taste or feel or anything, like that's scary. But on the other side of that, what is it? It's possibly your favorite thing. So doing that, and then just talking, being open. Um, one thing as men that we didn't have, that we don't have, is the vocabulary for our feelings.
Mhm.
We basically break everything down to happy, mad, glad, sad. Well, then, if you don't know what's going on, you're not going to be able to fix it. You're just going to kind of push it back down. And we start to get shame when we feel emotions. Doesn't matter which emotion, we push it aside and it's shame. And so it's like this shame bubble pop just comes up and punches us in the face. And sometimes we can, get back from it. And sometimes it keeps us down for a little while. So one thing that I had on a therapist, and she's amazing at breaking things down at a beginner level, like taking high ideas and being able, like a really good teacher, like your favorite journeyman that taught you to break down everything that was going on in the pole. And all of a sudden you have that moment that, oh, I can go up and I can troubleshoot this now. She did that for me with emotions, and that, your body is physically going to feel something when you're feeling an emotion. So when you physically feel that, think, why am I feeling this? Like, what could it be? Like, I the other day I had this sense of dread, like something bad is going to happen. What is it? Well, my kids were on spring break, so my routine was completely thrown off. I woke up at a wrong time, didn't make my own coffee, like literally nothing in the morning went right. And it's like, oh, I could be frustrated and irritated, or I could be like, well, it's just my routine changed. I need to take a deep breath, calm down, and try to figure out how I can get over this. And that has helped me more than most of my therapy sessions, to be completely honest. Just breaking down my emotions to that level is has been just eye-opening.
Mm-hmm. No, for sure. I could see how that would be. Just being more self-aware of everything. And I break that down even simpler to being intentional, you know.
Yeah.
You talked about no wasted moves. Well, that's what being intentional is. You're not wasting a move because you're already thinking about it, you're planning ahead. You're being intentional with every single step that you do. And I like that, you know what I mean? Because that's what we need to do even with our families. We need to be
Mm-hmm.
intentional with them, and knowing that, hey, if I do this, this could be the outcome. If I do this, this could be the outcome, you know. And communication is absolutely huge with our children and with our spouse.
Yeah.
When we're saying one thing but we don't mean it. I know for my wife, she thought I hated her because of the way I spoke to her. you know for the longest time, she thought I absolutely hated her because why? As a lineman, what sometimes we talk harsh, you know what I mean? Especially when we're being critical and we're like, why the heck, like an example would be like, why the hell are you doing it like that? That's stupid. Use your freaking
Yeah.
head. You know what I mean? When you talk to your spouse or your children that way, dude, what do you think the message you're conveying to them is?
That's the truth. That's something that I was going to bring up too. When we're negative and we're hypercritical like that, we're wasting moves. It doesn't matter if, what is going on. They're like, if it has to do with somebody else or another crew and how they're doing something, unless it's unsafe, who cares how they do something? Who cares if it takes them 10 minutes longer, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's theirs. What can you do for yours? What's something that they do that you like? And this is the same thing with cooking at home, with laundry, with whatever task it is.
Mm-hmm.
If they're the ones doing it, like you said, like those are the parameters, let them do it,
Mm-hmm.
whether it be your wife or whatever. And I'm glad you brought that up because that is absolutely massive. And that's the difference between a healthy crew and a healthy family,
Mm-hmm.
and honestly an unhealthy one that everybody's walking on eggshells and is completely stressed out.
Mm-hmm. And it's good that you relate that, because your crew is your family, and
Yeah.
vice versa. Your family is your crew. We spend a lot of times more time with our crew at work than we do our own family, and that's where the whole term "our brother's keeper," you know what I mean? Because when you're spending that much time with your bucket buddy or whatever, your pole buddy, you get to know that person pretty darn good. I had one of my bucket buddies, Jeff, great guy. He would tell me sometimes, like, man, I don't think we can get more intimate, Dave. And we're up in the sticky icky, working in between phases and all kinds of stuff, trying to change out this stupid buck and doing all kinds of stuff. And, this is back before all the, you know, tools and stuff that they've developed, and, that I had to rely on him. I had to rely on him to watch my back, to tell me, all right, dude, you're cool. I got your back. He was watching my back at that moment, and that's how we need to be with our family as well. They need to know that daddy's got their back, or your wife needs to know that, hey, my man's got my back.
Yeah. Yeah. And that goes, like you said, to your friends too, because
Mm-hmm.
as men, when we have friends, what do we talk about? Sports,
Mm-hmm.
hunting, fishing. We don't talk about our feelings. So when you feel alone, when you're going through something very, very stressful,
Mm-hmm.
what do we tend to do? We tend to insulate. We tend to draw within ourselves, and because we don't want to be burdens, we don't want to upset somebody, we don't want them to think we're weak, right? And that is one of the most unhealthy things you can do, like, letting your family know, or having a friend that you can actually talk to, that's not going to be like, what do you talk about, what, you're so weak, you're talking like a girl right now, quit being a little sissy, like stuff like that. Like, no, like, we need to talk about what is really going on in our lives if we want to be our best selves and be there for everybody.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And let's even look at that, since we're linemen, right? And
Yeah.
we could apply that in a different perspective. Like you said, insulate, right? Well, what's some of the tasks that we do when we're rubber gloving, right? We identify, we insulate, we isolate, we test, and we ground, right?
Yeah.
So you're absolutely right. We insulate, right? We start self-preserving. Why do we insulate? We insulate because we want to put up protective boundaries, right? And then we
Mhm.
tend to isolate, right? So we put up these walls, we isolate ourselves, we test to see if that person is safe. And if they're not, then we ground them, literally, right?
Yeah.
And we don't want to open up to these people. And I see it all the time, because I talk to linemen like, oh man, how am I going to tell this guy what's going on inside of me when 1 minute homie's blaring out about this other guy's problems and saying what a POS he is. And then when the guy comes up, he's shaking his hand like if nothing,
Yeah.
being two-faced. And I agree 100%. Why are you going to want to open up to that dude who's spilling his guts about everybody and is just talking bad about everybody? I mean, to me, that's just using wisdom, you know? So what I told the man was, dude, I mean, that's common sense. Obviously, you're not going to go open up to that guy. Find someone you can open up to. Find someone who's trustworthy, because there is people out there. Trust me, there is. There's some good human beings out there. But at the end, at the other edge of that coin, too, there's some very, very bad individuals, too, that I like to call
Yeah.
bad individuals, bad human beings, who don't have your best interests for whatever
Absolutely.
reason, you know what I mean? And that goes in, that's just in life, you know what I mean? And you got to have that wisdom to be able to see that, you know?
I agree completely.
Well, once again, RJ, brother, thank you for coming on our podcast. This has been amazing. I appreciate what you're doing. You guys check him out. He's got his own podcast called The Untapped Keg, and he talks about mental health and sobriety and stuff like that. If you want to give him a follow, RJ, how can they follow you? Are you on Instagram or anything like that? Or
You can find us on every single social media platform under Untapped Keg. So yeah, we got lucky. We were able to nail down on every platform Untapped Keg. And our DMs are open if you need to talk. We're there. No judgment, just straight, there to listen, peer-to-peer support. And in my what I've noticed is the peer-to-peer support is sometimes more powerful than the professional support. So feel free to reach out if you need to.
amen, brother. No, definitely, man. We got to do this again. I
I
appreciate you
agree.
coming on here and just sharing your wisdom, RJ.
Thank you for having me. This was this was incredible. I can't believe an hour's up already.
Right on, brother. We'll be talking at you soon. See you
All
down the
right.
line.